Hello, and welcome back to Parley, the show where you folks support the other stuff I make by paying me monthly to talk about the topic of your choice. And this month, True Mr.FOoT has chosen. There was a very recent parlay about fish. How Fish is Made is the name of a game. Mr. Foot says, I've recently had the pleasure of playing this wonderfully odd game. Just look at the Steam page. What is this game? In this parlay, we will play this game, and then we'll talk about it. It's a free game on Steam, and it takes less than 15 minutes to complete. I encourage everyone reading this to try it for themselves. Content warning. Graphic fish violence, trypophobia, and parasites. If you are wildly uncomfortable with any of those, you might want to skip this one. And then there's a link to the game on Steam. I'll put that in the description of this parlay. And then there's a spoiler that part. Mr. Root, you've written, please read this after you play the game, which I did. So the way I structure parlay like this is there's a half-hour block, and I spent 15 minutes of it playing the game. Obviously, it doesn't need to be down to the second, but about 15 minutes playing the game. And I talked to all the fish, I read all the stuff, and now here we are, and I'll just share my thoughts for a few minutes, yeah. There's a lot. So I guess I'll break it into three sections. The first one is going to be surface level stuff. Like if I wasn't digging, maybe this is what I would have thought. And then there's going to be a second part, which is me speculating a bit more, kind of my relationship to those thoughts. The third part will be different endings or the effectiveness of this type of game. So surface level thoughts. It reminded me a lot of Food Inc. immediately. My sort of shallower impression, I'm not going to simplify the whole game to just this, so please don't worry, but my shallower impression was this is one of those things where people use scare tactics to get people to not want to eat meat. It's like people who don't think about how eating an animal can be a little gnarly, is the word I'm going to use, then see and are shocked and then don't eat animals anymore. I personally have a lot of frustrations with that approach. So I don't usually take very kindly to like the Food Inc. category. I'm not saying it's bad in and of itself. I'm just saying that there's a lot of people who act as if no one knows anything about sort of animal processing, and you cannot possibly eat an animal while knowing that thing. That's just not possible morally. At first, I felt like this game's visual style on some of the presentation was intending to show that. You see fish, there will be, I guess, minor spoilers. I'm not sure you really can spoil this game. Anyway, going forward, you see a couple of fish trapped in trash, for example. You see fish, again, graphic fish violence. Let's just leave it at that. And of course, a very bloody, gory machine and fish parts amalgamated together. That is one of the main visual themes of the game. Now, personally, I have decided that I don't ultimately think the game is going for that approach. I don't think that's really the point, as it were. I'm not sure, and maybe that's a thing the game cares about doing. Maybe that's a thing the game does, which is more important. I think it is a thing the game does. I think there are people who would just be grossed out and leave the game thinking, well, I'm not going to eat fish anymore because that was gross or something. Politely, I'm not going to talk more about that subject. I don't have a lot of positive things to say about that. I think it's a lot more complicated than that, whether or not we should eat animals and something food processing industry. I believe, in short, that usually when people use these kind of gross out tactics, they are, while maybe affecting something positive, they are vastly oversimplifying something that is only a problem because it is complicated. And that is why I have a lot of frustration with those themes. Now, this is where this game began to appeal to me a little bit more. It became clear early on that this game certainly isn't just doing that. You're asked a lot of times whether you're going up or down. And I noticed throughout the game that the words up and down are color-coded, but not consistently. Like the colors are purposefully swapped from time to time. As if the first thing I thought when I saw the colors was, oh, up is red, which people usually pick less. What was that one study? I thought to myself. So maybe that encourages people to pick down, but the word up is up, which is good, maybe. And so they're trying to get you to not just pick one that way. But they swapped the colors a few times. I think a few times. I tried to keep track of it. Now, I picked up throughout the entire game. I decided, well, I'm going to pick up. That was my initial reaction. I will choose up. And so when the colors swapped, I thought, and I picked up. Yeah, that was interesting. There's a fish at the end who tells you how many people picked up and down. The colors are swapped. I also thought it was interesting that at the very end of the game, when you pick up or down, down is on the left, which a lot of English readers view as like first, and up is on the right, which a lot of English readers would think as like the second choice, whereas up had been frequently listed before down up to that point. So that also kind of switched. I thought that was kind of interesting. Lots of other ways in which the game is transitioning into my thoughts about like what's deeper going on here. The game is attempting to point out something about how choice is made, and how it mostly isn't made. I think that with a game like this, it's important to explore why it benefits from being a game, like why need to play it. This game is basically dialogue. There are no challenges in this game. And it basically just makes you walk while you talk to the different fish. I suppose you could not talk to them as well. I think you could not talk to them. I talked to all of them because and there's a part where you need to do something pretty brutal to another fish, or at least I think you need to. Perhaps there's a way around it. And so the game is trying to put you in the experience of that fish a little bit, to really drive home the sort of patheticness of flopping along. I think how you move in this game and the bump, bump, bump noise as you slap against the ground is effective, I personally thought, at putting you in the mindset of, yeah, we're a fish. You know, we don't have the capacity to do much about any given situation. We're just kind of moving along. And the game takes a bit of a turn, I think, as soon as it sinks in that the fish that you speak to are speaking in very educated, or they appear to be educated, terms. You know, like they have perfectly competent vocabulary. There's a joke about one fish who, we'll talk about the two zealot fish in a minute, but there's a fish that constantly misuses or like misspeaks vocabulary. I thought there's a lot going on there in my opinion, so we'll come back to that. But yeah, I think the game is trying to take away this idea that fish don't have feelings because they aren't smart. The game is maybe saying, let's not, like, forget about that for a sec. Whatever. But here's their experience. And isn't it a lot like your experience, is my conclusion. The game seems to be saying, look how choice is often not made or makeable. How you often make a choice, but it's kind of for show. You know, does it really matter? And how choices can be manipulated by very small details. Again, swapping the order, the color of those up and down choices. There's a fish that tells you how many people have chosen up and down, and that itself might change one's mind. Seeing that more, I think in my game at least, if this isn't randomized, more people had picked down, which again, I just stuck with my up. But there's a way in which there's an element of personality test in here, right? Like, if you know me fairly well, it's probably pretty easy for you to anticipate that it's not of significance to me whether up or down is more popular. Like, I'm a kind of person where that wouldn't change my choice. There are people who would change to the more popular one, and people who would change to the less popular one, and people who would change based on color, or they forgot maybe, and people who would switch their choice many times. And I'm none of those. Personally, I'm a type of person where it just makes no never mind. It's deeply interesting to me, but it won't really affect my choice usually, for better or for worse. So I thought that was really interesting. As soon as I saw that, I thought, wow, there's like at least 5 different ways you could respond to this piece of information. And I did the least interesting one. I just did none of them. At least that's how I view it. Again, from my perspective, maybe other people would say, well, you know, you could pick the fastest one, and then arguably you did or didn't pick the one that you can get through the game the easiest, that would be even less of a choice, maybe. I don't know. You could think of it that way. So that was really interesting. I thought the way in which the game demonstrated a similarity between the fish and the humans is, going back to the whole maybe getting people to care about the lives of animals more. I hope I didn't give you the impression that I have a negative feeling of that. I'm just frustrated by the way in which a lot of disgust-focused tactics, they may not intend harm, but they are heavily oversimplifying, again, a situation which is only a problem because it is not simple, because it isn't that simple. If it was, then we wouldn't be in this situation. But just to dip a toe in the vast pool that is the complicated nature of, not eating animals that are heavily processed, for example, there's a financial element. For some people in some cultures, it is much cheaper or accessible, or like they don't have to reinvent their entire eating plan, which they don't have time to do, for them to eat animals. So it really doesn't, I would reckon most people, it doesn't really matter at all where the food comes from. That's just not relevant. They either will have enough food or they won't. That's not me, fortunately, and I have made some significant shifts in my diet over the past few years because I fortunately I can do that to some extent. Mostly, my job is to make builds about things, so I can easily reorganize my entire diet. That's like my entire thing that I do. So that's, sure, I can organize an entire culinary thing that includes a lot less animal products because that is a sustainable and, where I live, often cheaper way to eat that can still be very healthy provided appropriate dietary balance. But that's hard. If it wasn't hard, maybe we wouldn't be in this mess anyway. But I think it's interesting if we take that the idea a little seriously and say it wouldn't be so bad if people ate less, animal stuff. Trying to, like, my personal opinion, let's just say for a minute, is that people should maybe take eating another animal or just food with a bit more reverence. Like, take your food more seriously. Take a little bit of time to cook something nice and eat it. In the long run, it's very economical to do that. I believe it to be very fulfilling. It can be a great thing to do with a friend or a partner. This is a good thing. And to respect the food that we're eating, even when that food may have not had the most pleasant experience when alive in some debatable, let's just say alive way, is, I think, the more appropriate approach to care about the food we're eating. And I believe that if most people had true reverence for the food they ate, they simply wouldn't eat as much of anything, really. They would hopefully appreciate the unique moments where they eat a certain thing, and think hard about, am I going to buy this one thing? So personally, and this is deeply just my totally subjective, I have no idea how effective that would be, philosophy about this thing. I felt like this game was a more effective approach to maybe informing that choice a little bit more, to make you just think about it. There's an element of the game that suggests that maybe your choice, one way or another, about eating fish maybe doesn't really matter, which I think is worth questioning. I think most people's choice about whether to eat things, again, is motivated by socioeconomic factors, not really by morality. And if it is motivated by morality, there's certainly things they could be doing that would be very good for animals and the planet that they probably aren't doing. Let's just put it that way. Other than eating animals less. But yeah, I don't know. What I'm getting at, basically, I lost my thread for a sec there, is just that I thought that the approach whereby we point out the similarities between the human experience and the sardine experience felt I'm interested in that line of thinking. That to me felt like there's something here, whereas the sort of Food Inc. category, to be blunt, I feel is essentially just ignorance. Like, I feel like I'm a person who's deeply paranoid about where all my stuff comes from. And so, of course, to me, it's only natural to just investigate, you know, oh, meat processing is fairly obviously, just looking at the amount of meat in the grocery store, a bit gross and not particularly ethical. You could buy meat that wasn't processed that way, but the animal still dies. And so there's some questions there. And again, to be blunt, I think it's a bit elementary when to know that thing. It feels like if you live in an educated society, I would expect someone to think of that on their own, I guess. Maybe that is rude or judgmental. I personally think then it is a little childish when people are, again, just shocked by this thing I don't know. To me, there's a bit of living under a rock. I hate to be rude if somebody felt that way. Like, look, you handle it in your own way. I'm being honest about my biases because I wish to correct them. That being said, I do feel like there's not a lot more to do with that line of reasoning. That's my point, is that sort of horrifying people into not eating something there's really not much further to go, in my opinion. Again, from my very judgmental personal opinion, it has very little effect on someone who has simply already thought about it. Whereas this made me think, yeah, like this is not really a question about, eating fish, as much as just the sort of animal train to hell that we're all on. My ending that I got to finish out this parlay was, I picked up the whole way. And so at the end, I went through the right passage, which said up for me. It's occurred to me that those may change depending on your decisions throughout the game. Anyway, I don't know if they do. I didn't play it multiple times. And I'm sure there are multiple endings, at least two, you figure, maybe more. And up basically ascended me to a fish godlike being amalgam of fishy parts, which I related to being like the human experience. I don't remember the exact wording, but very much that, sure, we've gained knowledge together, ascended to understand much information about this corporeal world, but all we're doing is multiplying and creating more. There's no consensus, so nothing can be accomplished. Something like that line was in there, which is literally just current human society. So I thought, yeah, okay, sure. So if you heighten the sardine, if you want to think of it this way, my reading is, okay, sure, yeah, like that's a human. Equally pointless, of no further merit than the sardine. I would imagine then that down means you get eaten or something. You are treated as less than a sardine, as just the food stuff, I would imagine. And then maybe there are other endings. I don't know. Okay. Yeah. So we're running out of time. I went a little over. But this was fun. I like getting to dip into these. And again, if you want to do something like this for a parlay, just keep in mind you've got about a half-hour block that I will use to, prepare. I'll sit down, read the parlay, give myself about a half hour to do this stuff. So in this case, I played the game for about 15 minutes, and now the parlay's maximum length is going to be, a wiggly 15 minutes. It's just important not to let it get out of hand is all. I'm trying to be better about that. But I guess to add a point of response, something that I didn't feel like I understood was the sort of show tune bit. There's a sort of a parasite and a fish that are doing a little dance together. And that part was a little bit, isn't it gross fish parts kind of thing. But I also felt like I wasn't penetrating something there. Like that did little to affect my reading of the piece, as it were. If that's not pretentious enough as a way for me to say I didn't get it, then there you go. I did want to very briefly, though, touch on a part I was a little confused by. The two zealot fish. I said I'd come back to this. There's one fish, there's a point where you meet two fish, and one of them insists that up is the way to go. It's always been up. I've been an upper my whole life, that kind of thing. And then another fish that says down. I thought it was interesting to see how that part highlighted the two colors, the sort of red and blue, as if political parties. And maybe I thought this a little bit more because I'm in the United States, but I felt like they were stereotyping Democrats and Republicans a bit, which I don't have a whole lot to say about. It just set off a little bell in my head that said that's risky, because a lot of people don't fully understand the folly of all political groups. There's very, very reductive, oversimplified, hateful people in all of them. Like you could view any of them that way. To me, it falls prey to something I've talked about in previous parlays, kind of like when you view the other side of a situation from your side, whatever that is, it usually looks stupid. Like you see the stupidest part. There is a not stupid part, like, or at least relatively not as stupid part. For a certain thing I'm talking about right now, I'm not sure there actually is a less stupid version of that view right now. But anyway, what I mean is that I was worried a lot of people might bounce off that part, or maybe just not get it, or maybe I'm just reading that into it. But it made me think the downfish has a lot of speech. Down was blue at that point, and that fish had a lot of speech that was like them using a fancy word in a like a incorrect, but like as if they weren't fully able to enunciate it kind of way, which felt like a certain stereotype of I don't know who, but just people being uneducated, I guess. And it was interesting to see how it to me, it felt like it was mirroring, blindly following one thing or the other sounds stupid, no matter how stupid you sound. It doesn't matter if you sound uneducated or whatever. Not that it should even be read that way in the information age. Sometimes people are just texting or whatever and they're being lazy, or they natively speak another language and just aren't as familiar with this one or whatever, but it effectively to me read as, blindly following one path is silly either way. You can talk as if it's this grand thing, or sound like kind of an idiot with these platitudes where you're misusing a word, but either way, that is silly. Now you might then ask, well, Zandy, what is the difference between you, who you might not say blindly, but you did stick to up the whole time, didn't you, Zandy? And that one up fish who sounded crazy, the zealot fish. What is the difference between those two choices, really? Like, I locked in my up choice the whole time. For whatever reason, I just sort of chose to. Now, I wasn't willing to defend it to my dying breath, but there were no reasons given for these choices, for people do not usually make choices based on reasons. And even for somebody who tries very hard to make choices based on reasons, sometimes you need to make a choice where there just isn't reasoning to be done. And so what do? Well, I can still make the choice, sure. True Mr.FOoT, thank you for requesting this parlay. I think you'll be very interested in a stream event that I'm going to do in the next few weeks that is about sort of overloading our choice-making systems. It's not very directly related to this game, but I feel like it is, like indirectly, that is a sub-theme that this game had, was how do we form choice when usually people either don't see what the reasonings would be, or they simply don't care about reasoning. Maybe there is no reasoning at all clearly possible, for example. Or it just seems like there's low stakes. It's just a game I played for 15 minutes as one parlay during my workday. So I just had to make a choice, that topic interests me quite a bit, especially as it regards making builds in games, because some types of games that I think are broadly very good, they score very high when making a build, greatly tax your choice making. So that is something I'm going to explore toward the end of this month. This was really interesting. This definitely will affect the way I'm going to cover that.